The scent of truffle oil and old money clung to the velvet drapes of Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive its name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones. For Ilara Vance, it smelled only of exhaustion and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. Each night she navigated the labyrinth of linen-draped tables, her smile a carefully constructed mask, her feet a dull, throbbing ache. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a ghost, trained to be invisible until summoned, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, and to absorb the casual cruelties of the city's elite with a serene nod. Art school was a distant, shimmering dream now, a life she'd had to pack away in a dusty portfolio under her bed. Her mother's illness had been a thief in the night, stealing not just her health but Ilara's future, replacing charcoal sketches with order pads and vibrant canvases with starched aprons. Her mother needed medications that cost more than a month's rent, and Aurelia paid better than any gallery assistant job ever could. So she endured. She endured the leering gazes of hedge fund managers and the dismissive waves of their wives. Most of all, she endured the reptilian oversight of the restaurant's manager, Mr. Alastair Finch. Finch was a man stitched together from smug superiority and cheap cologne. He moved through his domain with the silent, predatory grace of a shark, his eyes missing nothing, a fork placed a millimeter out of alignment, a water glass left unfilled for more than a minute, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. All were catalogued in his mind, ammunition for the verbal floggings he delivered in the clattering chaos of the kitchen. He seemed to take a special, venomous pleasure in tormenting Ilara, perhaps sensing the artist's soul that wilted under his sterile tyranny. Tonight, the air was particularly thick with tension. A food critic was rumored to be dining incognito, and Finch was prowling the floor like a caged panther. Ilara was assigned to Section 4, the quietest corner of the restaurant, usually reserved for those who craved privacy. Her only cover for the evening was a man at table 17, a lone diner who had become a semi-regular presence over the past few months. He was an enigma. He was always alone, always dressed in simple, well-made but unremarkable clothes. A dark sweater, grey trousers, no watch, no jewellery. He never made a reservation under a flashy name, it was always just Croft. He would sit for hours, nursing a single glass of whiskey, his gaze distant, as if observing the world from behind a pane of soundproof glass. He was polite but profoundly silent. He'd nod his thanks, meet her eyes with a brief, searching look that held a universe of unspoken sorrow, and then retreat back into his solitude. The other waiters gossiped about him, a writer maybe, a washed-up academic. Ilara felt a strange, quiet kinship with him. He seemed to be hiding from the world, just as she was. She made sure his water was always cold and his solitude was never disturbed. His name, she learned from the reservation system, was Julian. The storm broke at table 15. The Davenports were new money, loud and desperate to be seen. Mrs. Davenport, dripping in diamonds that seemed to catch and amplify her shrill voice, had ordered the 1982 Chateau Margaux, a bottle that cost more than Ilara's monthly salary. She had taken one sip and declared it corked. Finch had glided over instantly, his smile a rictus of strained hospitality. He performed the ritual tasting, his eyes closing in a theatrical display of connoisseurship. "Madam," he purred, "the wine is perfect. It has simply been allowed to breathe. The notes are complex, earthy." "It tastes like wet dog," Mr. Davenport boomed, his face florid. "Get us another one." Finch's smile tightened. The cost of the bottle was a significant loss. His eyes, cold and hard as river stones, flicked to Ilara, who stood frozen a few feet away. He needed a scapegoat. Perhaps the decanting process was rushed, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant for the entire section to hear. "Vance, come here." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She approached the table, her hands suddenly clammy. "Yes, Mr. Finch." "You decanted this bottle, did you not?" he asked, his tone silky with menace. "Yes, sir, as you instructed. And did you, in your haste, perhaps agitate the sediment? Did you fail to allow it the proper time to aerate?" Each question was a stone cast at her. I followed the procedure exactly, sir," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The eyes of every diner in the section were on her. In the corner, Julian Croft slowly lowered his whiskey glass, his gaze fixed on the unfolding drama. "The procedure," Finch laughed, a short, ugly bark. "The procedure is for professionals, not for distracted little girls who dream of finger painting instead of focusing on their work." The insult was so personal, so cruel, it stole the air from her lungs. He turned back to the Davenports. "My sincerest apologies. It seems my staff is not up to the standard you deserve. We will, of course, replace the bottle. And this will come out of her wages." Tears pricked at the back of Ilara's eyes. It wasn't just the money, it was a fortune she didn't have. It was the public humiliation, the stripping away of her dignity in front of a room full of strangers. She felt a hot flush of shame and anger rise in her cheeks. She opened her mouth to protest, to defend herself, but only a small, choked sound came out. And that was her mistake. Finch saw the flicker of defiance in her eyes. He despised insubordination more than incompetence. He wanted her broken. "Do you have something to say, Vance?" he hissed, stepping closer until his cologne was a suffocating cloud around her. She swallowed hard, finding a sliver of her voice. "Mr. Finch, that's not fair. The wine was fine. You said so yourself." The silence that followed was absolute. The clinking of cutlery stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Finch's face, a mask of professional charm moments before, contorted into a snarl of pure fury. He had been contradicted, in public, by her. His hand moved so fast she didn't see it coming. It was not a push or a shove, it was a slap. The sharp, cracking sound echoed through the cavernous dining room like a gunshot. Her head snapped to the side, the force of it sending a spray of hot tears from her eyes. A bright, stinging pain bloomed across her cheek, but it was nothing compared to the fiery agony of the humiliation. The entire world seemed to narrow to the ringing in her ears and the stunned, pitying faces of the diners. She stood there, trembling, one hand flying to her face, the imprint of his fingers already burning her skin. Finch stared down at her, his chest heaving, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He had made his point. He had restored order. Across the room, at table 17, Julian Croft had gone utterly still. The quiet man, the ghost in the corner, had watched the entire exchange. He had seen the manager's calculated cruelty, the girl's quiet desperation, and the raw injustice of the final violent act. The sorrow in his eyes, a constant placid lake, was now a churning, violent storm. He placed his whiskey glass down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. And then he rose. The sound of the slap had created a vacuum, a pocket of stunned silence that seemed to suck all the air out of Aurelia. In that vacuum, every eye was on Ilara, her hand pressed to her reddening cheek, and on Finch, who seemed to swell with his own petty power. He had reasserted his dominance, and the silence of the patrons was his applause. He smoothed his tie, a small smug smirk playing on his lips as he prepared to dismiss her like a piece of broken furniture. But the silence was shattered by a new sound. It wasn't loud at first, it was the scrape of a chair leg against the polished marble floor. It was a heavy, deliberate sound that cut through the tension. Every head turned towards the source, the quiet man in the corner, Julian Croft. He stood to his full height, and for the first time people seemed to truly see him. He wasn't exceptionally tall, but he possessed a density, a centered stillness that commanded attention. The sorrow that usually clouded his features was gone, replaced by a cold, focused rage that was terrifying in its intensity. His eyes, which had always seemed to be looking through the world, were now locked onto Alistair Finch with the precision of a laser sight. Finch, annoyed by the interruption, turned. "Sir, I must ask you to—" He never finished the sentence. Julian took one long, fluid stride towards his own table. He didn't say a word. His movements were economical and brutally efficient. With a single explosive motion, he kicked the leg of his heavy oak table. The force was astonishing. The table flipped into the air as if it were made of cardboard, sending his whiskey glass, the water carafe, and the silverware scattering across the floor in a cacophony of shattering crystal and clattering metal. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Mrs. Davenport shrieked. Finch took an involuntary step back, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? Security!" Julian ignored him. He ignored the panicked whispers and the frightened stares. His focus was absolute. As the debris settled, his eyes scanned the floor and found what he was looking for. The discarded full bottle of Chateau Margaux that Finch had so theatrically condemned. It had been placed on a nearby service stand. He moved towards it. Two waiters, larger men than Julian, started to move to intercept him, but they stopped dead when he turned his gaze on them. It was not a look of aggression, but of such profound, unshakable certainty that it paralyzed them. It was the look of a man who had made a decision and would not be diverted by anything or anyone. He picked up the heavy, dark green bottle, his grip sure and steady around its neck. He weighed it in his hand for a moment, his expression unreadable. Ilara, still cradling her face, watched through a blur of tears, a strange sense of unreality washing over her. The world had tilted on its axis. The silent man, her quiet, sad customer, was erupting like a volcano. Finch, recovering his composure, puffed out his chest. He was the manager. This was his kingdom. "You are insane," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You will be paying for every bit of this damage. I'm calling the police. You will be arrested for—" Julian closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He was inches from Finch now, the difference in their energy palpable. Finch was a storm of blustering, impotent anger. Julian was the calm, cold abyss, at the center of a hurricane. For the first time since he had started frequenting the restaurant, Julian Croft spoke. His voice was not loud, but it was deep and resonant, a gravelly baritone that carried an undeniable weight of authority. It cut through every other sound in the room. "You don't," he said, the words low and measured, "touch her." The words hung in the air, a simple declarative statement of fact. It was not a request. It was not a threat. It was a law. Finch, emboldened by his own indignation, scoffed. "And who are you to tell me—" That was as far as he got. Julian's arm moved in a swift, brutal arc. He didn't swing wildly. The motion was controlled, precise, and utterly devastating. The bottom of the wine bottle connected with the side of Alistair Finch's head with a sickening, percussive thud that was followed by the sharp crack of glass. The bottle didn't shatter completely, but a large chunk of it broke away. Dark, ruby-red wine, the color of blood, exploded outwards, splashing across Finch's pristine white shirt and the horrified face of Mrs. Davenport at the next table. Finch's eyes went wide with shock, then rolled back in his head. His legs gave way, and he collapsed to the floor in a heap, unconscious before he even hit the marble. A small trickle of real blood mixing with the expensive wine matting his hair. The restaurant erupted into chaos. People screamed. Chairs were knocked over as diners scrambled away from the scene. Someone was yelling for a doctor. Someone else was on the phone, their voice high and frantic as they spoke to a 911 operator. In the center of it all stood Julian Croft. He held the jagged remnant of the bottle in his hand, his knuckles white. He was breathing heavily, the first sign of emotion he'd shown other than the cold fury in his eyes. He looked down at the unconscious form of Finch, then his gaze moved and found Ilara. She was still standing in the same spot, her own pain forgotten, her mind reeling. The silent observer, the man she had felt a quiet pity for, had just committed an act of shocking, indefensible violence. For her. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second the rage in his eyes softened, replaced by that familiar, profound sadness. It was a look of grim, regretful necessity. Then he let the broken bottle drop from his fingers. It clattered onto the floor, the sound lost in the rising tide of panic, and sirens wailing in the distance. He did not run. He did not resist. He simply stood there, waiting for the consequences of his actions to arrive. The arrival of the NYPD was a jarring symphony of screeching tires, slamming doors, and the crackle of police radios that sliced through the restaurant's opulent atmosphere. 2 uniformed officers, Officers Miller and Chen, entered first, their expressions grim and businesslike, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. They were followed by paramedics who made a beeline for the groaning, wine and blood-soaked form of Alistair Finch. The scene was one of controlled chaos. Diners were being herded towards the exit by the remaining staff. their voices a frantic buzz of eyewitness accounts, each more embellished than the last. He just went crazy. Came out of nowhere. Smashed the bottle right over his head. Julian Croft remained where he stood, a statue in the eye of the storm. He offered no resistance as Officer Miller approached him cautiously but firmly. "Sir, I need you to put your hands behind your back." Julian complied without a word, his movements calm and deliberate. The cold click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed in the now quieter room. He didn't flinch, he didn't protest, he simply stared straight ahead, his face an inscrutable mask. Officer Chen knelt beside Finch, who was now conscious and moaning, a paramedic shining a penlight into his eyes. "Can you tell me what happened, sir?" Chen asked. Finch, clutching his head, pointed a trembling finger at Julian. He attacked me. That lunatic. He was a customer. Went berserk. Destroyed property. Then he hit me with that bottle." "Why would he do that?" Miller asked, his voice a low, skeptical rumble as he led Julian towards the door. "No reason. Absolutely no reason," Finch cried, his voice pitching with a victim's righteous indignation. "He's insane. He should be locked up forever." Ilara watched, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Everything was happening so fast. The man who had defended her was being arrested, portrayed as a violent madman. And the man who had assaulted her, who had humiliated her, was now the victim, his story being taken as gospel. The injustice of it was a bitter pill to swallow. "Is that true?" Officer Chen's voice cut through her thoughts. He had moved from Finch and was now standing in front of her. His eyes were sharp, observant. He'd seen her hand still protectively covering her cheek, where a livid red handprint was now blooming in stark contrast to her pale skin. Did this man attack the manager for no reason? This was the moment. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Finch was now sitting up, glaring at her, his eyes filled with a clear, unspoken threat. "Say the wrong thing and your life is over." The Davenports were nodding vigorously in agreement with Finch's story. The other staff members averted their gazes, terrified of being caught in the crossfire. Her job, her only means of supporting her mother, hung by a thread. Siding with a violent stranger against her boss was career suicide. The safe, easy thing to do was to stay silent, to nod, to let the official version of the story stand. She looked over at Julian, who was being escorted out. He paused at the doorway and turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers one last time. There was no plea in his gaze, no expectation. There was only that same quiet, observant stillness. He was leaving the choice entirely to her. He had acted to defend her dignity, and now she had to choose whether to defend his truth. A memory flashed in her mind, her mother, frail but with an unbreakable will, telling her, "Courage, Ilara, is not the absence of fear. It's doing what's right when you're terrified." She took a deep breath, the air stinging her lungs. Her voice, when it came, was shaking but clear. "No," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's not what happened." Finch's head snapped towards her, his face a thundercloud of fury. Officer Chen's expression remained neutral, but he gave her his full attention. "Tell me what happened, miss." And so she did. She told them everything. She told them about the wine, about Finch's public berating, about him docking her pay for an entire month's salary over a bottle he himself had declared perfect. And then, her voice dropping but losing none of its conviction, she told them about the slap. "He hit me," she said, finally lowering her hand from her cheek, revealing the clear, angry imprint. "He slapped me in front of everyone because I told him it wasn't fair. Mr. Croft, Julian, he only did what he did after he saw that." A murmur went through the few remaining staff and patrons. Officer Chen's eyes narrowed as he looked from her cheek to Finch's sputtering, indignant face. "Mr. Finch, is this true? Did you strike your employee?" "It's a lie," Finch shrieked, scrambling to his feet. "She's covering for him. They're in it together. She was a terrible employee, always insubordinate. I was simply asserting managerial authority." "By hitting her?" Miller asked, having returned from placing Julian in the squad car. His tone was laced with disbelief. The narrative was shifting. The foundation of Finch's victimhood was cracking. Ilara's testimony had become a wrecking ball. She had expected to feel terrified, but instead a strange calm settled over her. She had told the truth. Whatever happened next, she had honored the sacrifice the silent man had made for her. "I want to press charges," she said, looking directly at Finch, her fear finally eclipsed by a cold, hard anger. "For assault." Finch's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. His carefully constructed world was beginning to implode. "Take her statement," Miller said to Chen. "And him." He jerked a thumb towards Finch. "He's not the only one coming downtown tonight. Paramedics can check him out there. Let's go, Mr. Finch. You can tell us all about your managerial authority at the precinct." As a stunned Alistair Finch was helped to his feet and read his rights, Ilara felt a profound sense of whiplash. In the space of 30 minutes, she had been humiliated, assaulted, defended, and had now become the key witness in a case that had just exploded in the middle of one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. She had no idea who Julian Croft was, but she knew one thing for certain: she had just thrown a grenade into her own life, and she had no idea where the pieces would land. The 17th precinct was a world away from the gilded halls of Aurelia. The air smelled of stale coffee, disinfectant, and the low-grade despair of 1,000 bad nights. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly greenish glow on the scuffed linoleum floors and peeling paint. Ilara sat on a hard plastic chair, a cup of lukewarm water clutched in her hands, replaying the night's events in a dizzying loop. She had given her statement to a detective named Rodriguez, a weary-looking woman with kind eyes who had treated her with professional sympathy. Finch was being processed in another part of the station, his blustering protests having long since faded into sullen silence. But the main event was happening in an interrogation room down the hall, where the silent man, Julian Croft, was being held. The police were running his prints, trying to figure out who this well-dressed but seemingly anonymous man was, who had flipped a table and assaulted a restaurant manager with a bottle of vintage wine. Ilara felt a knot of guilt tighten in her stomach. He had acted for her, and now he was facing serious charges: assault with a weapon, destruction of property. His life could be ruined, and it was her fault. If she had just swallowed the humiliation, taken the slap, none of this would have happened. An hour bled into 2, the adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Just as she was about to ask Detective Rodriguez if she could leave, a sudden shift in the precinct's atmosphere occurred. It started with a low murmur, then the hurried footsteps of the precinct captain. A side door opened and a woman strode in who seemed to fundamentally alter the room's gravitational pull. She was in her late 40s, dressed in a charcoal grey suit so impeccably tailored it looked like a piece of architecture. Her silver hair was cut in a sharp, severe bob, and her eyes, behind a pair of sleek minimalist glasses, were the color of a winter sky. She moved with an aura of absolute, unshakable authority, flanked by 2 other men in equally sharp suits. "I am Evelyn Reed," she announced to the front desk sergeant, her voice calm and clear, yet carrying the implicit threat of a guillotine. "I am here for my client, Julian Croft. Captain Miller is expecting me." The sergeant, usually a bastion of bureaucratic indifference, practically tripped over himself to stand up. "Yes, ma'am. Right this way, ma'am." Ilara watched, perplexed. Who was this woman? And who, exactly, was Julian Croft to warrant such a high-powered, immediate response? The next 30 minutes were a blur of hushed, intense conversations behind closed doors. The energy of the entire precinct had changed from routine procedure to high-stakes damage control. Ilara could catch snippets of conversation as officers hurried past. Croft of Innovate. The Julian Croft. Holy. The name meant nothing to her. Innovate. She vaguely recalled seeing it on business news channels her father used to watch. Something about technology, software. Finally, the door to the interrogation room opened. Julian Croft walked out. He was no longer in handcuffs. Standing beside him was Evelyn Reed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He looked the same, the simple clothes, the quiet demeanor, but the context had changed everything. The police officers who had arrested him now looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Ilara. He walked directly towards her, ignoring everyone else. Evelyn Reed followed a half-step behind, her expression a careful, professional neutral. Ilara stood up, her heart pounding. He stopped a few feet from her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something other than sadness or rage in his eyes. It looked like concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his deep voice soft. She nodded, unable to find her own voice. They arrested Mr. Finch too," she managed to say. "On my statement." A small, almost imperceptible nod was his only response. He seemed to be studying her face, the still visible mark on her cheek. Evelyn Reed stepped forward slightly. "Ms. Vance," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "My name is Evelyn Reed. On behalf of Mr. Croft, I want to extend our sincerest gratitude for your honesty this evening. You showed remarkable courage." I just told the truth," Ilara whispered. "A rare and valuable commodity," Ms. Reed replied with a faint, wry smile. "Mr. Croft's actions were extreme, but his motivations were not without merit, thanks to your testimony. We will be handling all legal matters from here." She handed Ilara a business card. "A car is waiting downstairs to take you home. We've also taken the liberty of contacting a private physician to meet you there, just to ensure you have no lasting injury. A representative from our team will be in touch tomorrow to discuss everything else." Ilara was reeling. "A private physician, a car, a team. I don't understand," she said, looking from the formidable lawyer to the silent man. "Who are you?" Julian looked at his lawyer, a silent communication passing between them. Ms. Reed gave a slight nod. He looked back at Ilara. "My name is Julian Croft," he said simply, as if the name itself should explain everything. And for the first time, Ilara realized that to everyone else in this room, it did. Detective Rodriguez, who had been watching from a distance, finally approached. "Mr. Croft," she said, her tone now laced with a deference that was startling. "You're free to go. We have Mr. Finch in custody, and with Ms. Vance's statement and corroboration from 2 other staff members who finally came forward, the DA is confident." 2 others had come forward. Ilara's act of courage had been contagious. "Thank you, Detective," Julian said. He turned back to Ilara one last time. "Get some rest, Ms. Vance." And with that, he and his entourage swept out of the precinct, leaving a wake of stunned silence and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. Ilara stood holding the crisp, heavy stock of the business card. It read simply, "Evelyn Reed, Chief Counsel, Croft Industries." She walked out into the cool night air, the city lights seeming unnaturally bright. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb, a driver holding the rear door open for her. As she sank into the plush leather seats, she finally pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she typed Julian Croft into the search bar. The screen lit up with a flood of information. Photos of him, younger, smiling, standing on stages in front of massive crowds. Headlines from Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Wired. The reclusive genius behind Innovate. Julian Croft's net worth surpasses $50 billion. The tragic loss of tech visionary Julian Croft's wife, artist Anna Croft. He wasn't a writer, he wasn't an academic, he was one of the wealthiest, most powerful and most private men in the world. A tech billionaire who had dropped off the face of the earth a year ago after his wife's death. And he had been sitting in her section for months, hiding in plain sight. The silent man in the corner, the one she had felt a strange, sad kinship with, was a king in self-imposed exile. And tonight, for her, he had gone to war. The world as Ilara Vance knew it had been irrevocably, terrifyingly, and perhaps wonderfully shattered. The morning after felt like waking up in a different reality. Ilara's small apartment, usually her sanctuary, felt confining. The city noises outside a dull, intrusive roar. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the scene replay. The glint in Finch's eyes, the shocking sound of the slap, the explosion of glass and wine, the cold fury on Julian Croft's face. The physician Ms. Reed had sent was kind and professional, confirming she had no serious injury beyond soft tissue bruising and the lingering sting of humiliation. He left her with a cream and instructions to rest, a concept that seemed utterly alien. How could she rest when her life had been upended? She was, she knew with grim certainty, fired. There was no way she could ever set foot in Aurelia again. The thought sent a familiar spike of panic through her. Her mother's next round of treatments was in 2 weeks. The rent was due. The carefully balanced, precarious structure of her life was collapsing. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her spiraling thoughts. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Vance, this is Arthur Chen, from the office of Evelyn Reed at Croft Industries." The voice was young, crisp, and efficient. "I hope I'm not calling too early. We have a few matters we'd like to discuss with you, at your convenience." "Matters?" Ilara's voice was hoarse. "Yes, several in fact. First, on behalf of Mr. Croft, we have settled your employment contract with Aurelia's parent company, the Lux Hospitality Group. You will receive a severance package equivalent to 2 years' salary, effective immediately. A non-disclosure agreement is attached, of course, but it pertains only to the restaurant's proprietary business practices, not to the events of last night. You are free to speak about what happened to you." Ilara sank onto her sofa, her legs suddenly weak. 2 years' salary. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It was safety. It was medicine for her mother. It was impossible. "Why?" she whispered. Mr. Croft felt it was the least that could be done, considering you lost your employment as a direct result of his and Mr. Finch's actions, Arthur explained smoothly. "Which brings us to the second matter. Mr. Finch has been terminated, and the Lux Group is facing a significant internal investigation. It seems your decision to speak up has encouraged others. Several employees have come forward with complaints against Mr. Finch, ranging from wage theft to harassment. Your courage has had a domino effect." A small, fragile sense of vindication bloomed in Ilara's chest. It wasn't just about her, it was for every waiter he'd belittled, every busboy he'd cheated. "The third matter," Arthur continued, his tone shifting slightly, becoming less corporate and more personal, "is a direct request from Mr. Croft. He was made aware of your background, your studies at the Pratt Institute." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. How could he possibly know that? "Our resources are extensive," Arthur said, as if reading her mind. Mr. Croft's late wife, Anna, was a benefactor of the arts and a Pratt alumna herself. The Anna Croft Foundation has an endowment to support promising artists who have faced hardship. Mr. Croft has personally reviewed your portfolio, the one from your application files at the Institute. He was, and I quote, "exceptionally impressed by your charcoal series, City Ghosts." Ilara's mind flew to the dusty portfolio under her bed, the drawings she had poured her soul into, depicting the lonely, unseen figures of the city. She hadn't looked at them in years, believing that part of her life was over. "The Foundation would like to offer you the Phoenix Grant," Arthur said. "It covers full tuition to complete your degree, a living stipend, and a private studio space for the duration of your studies. There are no strings attached. It is a gift, in recognition of your talent and your character." Tears began to stream down Ilara's face, silent and hot. This was too much. It was a fairy tale, a fantasy so far removed from her reality of aching feet and demanding customers that she couldn't fully process it. "There is one final thing," Arthur said gently. "It is not a condition of the grant, but a separate proposal. Croft Industries is completing its new global headquarters in Hudson Yards. The centerpiece of the main atrium is a 40-foot wall designated for a commissioned art piece. Mr. Croft would like to personally commission you to create it." The phone nearly slipped from her trembling hand. A commission. A real professional commission for a space that would be seen by thousands of people. It was the dream she had been forced to bury, resurrected and handed to her on a silver platter. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice thick with emotion. "Say you'll consider it," Arthur replied kindly. "A car will pick you up at 11 tomorrow morning. Mr. Croft would like to meet with you at the site to discuss it with you himself. Will that be acceptable?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, of course." After she hung up, Ilara sat in stunned silence for a long time. The world had not just tilted, it had been reborn. The violent, terrifying night had somehow become the catalyst for a miracle. The silent billionaire had not just smashed a bottle, he had smashed the walls of the cage she had been trapped in. He had seen her, not as a waitress, a servant, an invisible ghost, but as a person. an artist. And he had, in his own explosive, shocking way, given her back the future she thought she had lost forever. The construction site at Hudson Yards was a controlled storm of activity. The symphony of cranes, rivet guns, and shouting workers was the sound of a new piece of the New York skyline being born. Ilara, wearing a hard hat and a safety vest over her simple dress, felt impossibly small amidst the soaring steel and glass. Julian Croft was waiting for her on the 20th floor in what would one day be the main atrium. The outer walls were entirely glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city and the Hudson River. The scale of the space was immense, cathedral-like, and there, dominating the entire area, was the 40-foot wall Arthur had mentioned. It was a vast blank canvas of white concrete waiting for a soul. Julian was not dressed in a suit. He wore the same kind of simple, unassuming clothes he'd worn at the restaurant, jeans and a dark Henley shirt. He looked more comfortable here, amidst the raw creation of a building, than he ever had in the stuffy confines of Aurelia. "Miss Vance, Ilara," he said, his voice softer than she remembered it. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Croft," she began, "Thank you. For everything. The severance, the grant. It's more than I could ever—" "Please," he interrupted gently, holding up a hand. "Call me Julian, and you don't need to thank me. What happened at the restaurant? I am not proud of my actions. I lost control. For the past year, since my wife passed, I've been adrift. I built a wall around myself. I spent my nights sitting in that restaurant because it was one of the last places Anna and I went together. I was just watching the world go by. And then I watched what that man did to you." He turned to look out the vast window, his gaze distant. "He tried to make you feel small, invisible. It's a kind of violence that doesn't always leave a bruise, but it's just as damaging. My wife, Anna, she was an artist. She saw people, truly saw them, and she taught me to see them too. When he slapped you, it was like a switch was flipped. All the anger, the grief I'd been bottling up, it found a target. He finally turned back to her, his eyes holding a deep, resonant sincerity. I'm not making excuses. What I did was wrong, but what he did to you was also wrong. And what you did in that police station, when you had every reason to be afraid, to stay silent, you chose to tell the truth. You showed a strength of character that I haven't seen in a very long time. That deserves to be rewarded far more than my wealth ever could." He gestured to the massive wall. Anna believed that art was the soul of a space. She always said a building without art is just a box. This was meant to be her wall. She was going to create a mural here, but she never got the chance. He paused, the grief still raw and visible in his expression. "When I saw your portfolio, your City Ghosts series, I understood. You see the same things she did, the people in the margins, the quiet stories, the invisible souls. You don't just draw people, you capture their humanity." He walked closer to the wall, running a hand over its smooth, cool surface. "I don't want to just give you money, Ilara. I want to give you a canvas. This canvas. I want you to fill this wall with your ghosts. Show the world the people they overlook every day. Make them visible, make them monumental. Finish what Anna started, but in your own voice." Ilara looked from Julian's earnest, grieving face to the vast, intimidating wall. The scale of it was terrifying. The responsibility was immense. But the opportunity was the dream of a lifetime. It was a chance to take all her pain, her struggles, her observations from her time as a ghost in a gilded cage, and turn it into something powerful and lasting. "I would be honored, Julian," she said, her voice filled with a conviction she hadn't felt in years. A genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows of his sorrow. "Good," he said. "Then let's get you a studio and some charcoal." In that moment, standing high above the city that had so often tried to crush her, Ilara Vance was no longer a waitress. She was no longer a victim. She was an artist, and she had a very big wall to fill. The silent billionaire had not just saved her from a bad night. He had, in his own broken and beautiful way, helped her save herself. And together they would create something new from the pieces of what they had both lost. Months turned into a year. Ilara's life transformed so completely it felt like a dream she was afraid to wake from. The Phoenix grant allowed her to re-enroll at Pratt, where she attacked her studies with a renewed passion and a clarity of vision she hadn't possessed before. Her classmates were in awe of her, not just for her talent, but for the quiet, unshakable confidence she now radiated. Her real work, however, happened in the sprawling, light-filled studio that Julian had provided for her. The commission for the Croft Industries headquarters became her obsession. The 40-foot wall was no longer an intimidating void, but a world of possibility. She spent weeks sketching, planning, creating a symphony of images drawn from her life. She sketched the tired face of a line cook she used to work with, capturing the dignity in his exhaustion. She drew the silhouette of a late-night street sweeper, his form almost blending into the shadows. She drew a young woman, much like herself, staring out the window of a bus, her reflection layered over the city lights. These were her city ghosts, no longer small, intimate charcoal drawings, but figures destined to be larger than life. Julian was a constant, quiet presence during this time. He would visit the studio once or twice a week, never intruding, never directing. He would simply sit in a chair in the corner, nursing a coffee, and watch her work. They rarely spoke much, but a deep, comfortable silence grew between them. He was watching her create, and in doing so, he seemed to be healing himself. He saw his late wife's passion mirrored in Ilara's dedication, and it brought him a peace he hadn't known since her death. He told her stories about Anna, about her artistic process, about her belief that art was a form of truth-telling. Ilara, in turn, found herself opening up about her mother, whose health was steadily improving. The financial burden of her care completely lifted. They were two lonely souls who had been thrown together by an act of violence, now finding solace and purpose in an act of creation. As for Alistair Finch, his downfall was swift and absolute. Charged with assault and facing a class action lawsuit from over a dozen former employees for wage theft and harassment, his career in hospitality was over. The story of the billionaire, the waitress, and the wine bottle became a minor legend in the city's restaurant scene, a cautionary tale about the perils of hubris. The day of the mural's unveiling was bright and cold. The Croft Industries headquarters was officially opening, and the atrium was filled with a curated crowd of journalists, art critics, and the city's business elite. Ilara stood off to the side, her heart hammering against her ribs, overwhelmed by the immensity of the moment. Julian found her there, offering her a glass of champagne. "Nervous?" he asked, a gentle smile on his face. "Terrified," she admitted. "Don't be," he said, his eyes finding hers. "You told the truth. That's all art is." When the moment came, Julian stepped up to the podium. He didn't speak about profit margins or market shares. He spoke about his wife, Anna, and her vision for the building. Then he introduced Ilara. "This space was meant to have a soul," he said, his voice echoing in the vast atrium. And its soul was brought to life not by a world-famous artist, but by a young woman who, until recently, was one of this city's ghosts. An artist who showed more integrity in the face of cruelty than many people show in a lifetime. It is my profound honor to introduce Ilara Vance and her work, The Unseen. A curtain dropped, revealing the 40-foot wall. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was breathtaking. Using a unique technique that blended charcoal and paint, Ilara had created a masterpiece. The figures of her ghosts were rendered in haunting grayscale detail, their faces filled with emotion and quiet dignity. They were the busboys, the dishwashers, the nannies, the doormen, the invisible infrastructure of the city. But behind them, and interwoven through them, were shimmering, ethereal lines of gold leaf tracing the paths they walked, the work they did, the lives they lived. It made them look not like ghosts, but like constellations, like saints in a modern cathedral. In the center of the mural was the figure of a waitress. Her back was mostly to the viewer, but she was looking over her shoulder, her face half in shadow. On her cheek was the faint, almost imperceptible imprint of a hand, rendered not in red, but in that same defiant gold leaf. It was not a mark of shame, but a badge of honor, a symbol of a wound that had been transformed into strength. The room was silent for a long moment, and then it erupted in thunderous applause. Critics were scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Photographers' flashes strobed against the mural. Ilara felt Julian's hand on her shoulder, a gesture of quiet, solid support. Later, as the crowd thinned, an elderly woman with kind eyes approached Ilara. "Young lady," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "my husband was a doorman on Park Avenue for 50 years. He passed away last year. The man you painted, right there, that is his soul. Thank you for seeing him." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. This was why she did it. This was the purpose. She found Julian by the glass wall, looking out at the city. The setting sun bathed the mural in a warm golden light, making it glow. "Anna would have loved it," he said softly. "She would have loved you." "Thank you, Julian," Ilara said, her voice full of an emotion too deep for words. "For seeing me." He turned to her, the setting sun catching the silver in his hair. The profound sadness she had first seen in him was still there, a part of him always, but it was no longer the whole story. Now there was peace. There was purpose. "You were never invisible, Ilara," he said. "You were just waiting for the right light."